I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would destroy the only things keeping me alive. But there I was, sitting at my kitchen table at 72 years old, watching David's face twist with disgust as tears rolled down my cheeks. The pain had been particularly brutal that morning. My arthritis was flaring something fierce, the kind of deep, gnawing ache that makes your bones feel like they're grinding against broken glass. My hands were so swollen I could barely grip my pill organizer, the little plastic compartments swimming through my tears as I tried to sort out my medications for the week. Monday, 2 arthritis pills, 1 heart medication, my antidepressant. Tuesday, the same routine that had kept me functional for the past 3 years. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, each day mapped out in tiny white and blue capsules that meant the difference between living and merely existing. That's when David walked in. He still had his key, of course. Had it since his father died 5 years ago, when I'd been so grateful to have someone looking out for me. How naive I'd been. Jesus Christ, Mom, he said, his voice dripping with that particular brand of contempt I'd grown to recognize. Are you crying over pills again? I looked up at my son, my only child, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the boy I'd cheered for at every soccer game, and saw nothing but irritation in his eyes. Not concern. Not love. Just annoyance that his 60-year-old mother was inconveniencing him with her pain. David, honey, I said, my voice shaky, my hands are so swollen today. The doctor said the weather change can make the arthritis worse, and I'm having trouble. You're having trouble because you're addicted, he snapped, cutting me off. Do you hear yourself? Crying because you can't get your pills fast enough. That's junkie behavior, Mom. The word hit me like a slap. Junkie. As if my prescribed medications for legitimate medical conditions made me some kind of street addict. As if the heart medication preventing another cardiac episode was the same as shooting heroin in an alley. These aren't recreational drugs, I tried to explain, my voice getting smaller. You know what Dr. Martinez said about my heart condition after the incident last year. And the arthritis pain is so severe that. Excuses, David said, waving his hand dismissively. He started pacing around my kitchen like a caged animal, his expensive suit making him look like a stranger in the home where I'd raised him. Every old person thinks they need a pharmacy to function. You're weak, Mom. Dad would be ashamed. That comment about his father broke something inside me. Harold had been nothing but gentle and supportive, even during his own battle with cancer. He'd never once made me feel weak for needing help. The tears came harder then, and I couldn't stop them. Look at you, David continued, his voice rising. Pathetic. Sitting there blubbering because you can't pop your pills fast enough. You know what? I'm done enabling this. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, David lunged toward the table. His hands swept across the surface, knocking over my pill organizer and sending medication scattering across the linoleum floor. But he wasn't done. David, no. I screamed, but he was already gathering up my pill bottles from the counter, the heart medication, the arthritis pills, the antidepressants that kept the crushing grief of losing Harold at bay. This ends now, he said, marching toward the sink with my lifeline in his arms. I struggled to stand, my arthritic joints screaming in protest, but I wasn't fast enough. The garbage disposal roared to life, and one by one, David dumped every single bottle of medication into it. Months of prescriptions, carefully managed dosages, the chemical buffer between me and unbearable pain, all of it disappeared into that mechanical mouth with a grinding, churning sound that I'll never forget. There, he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel as if he'd just taken out the trash. Now maybe you'll learn to be strong instead of dependent. I stood there in shock, watching the last of the foam disappear down the drain. My heart was already starting to race. Was that panic or the beginning of withdrawal from my cardiac medication? My hands throbbed with pain that I knew would only get worse. David, I whispered, those medications keep me alive. Without my heart pills. You'll be fine, he said coldly, grabbing his keys from the counter. Stop being so dramatic. People lived for thousands of years without popping pills every 5 minutes. And then he was gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen surrounded by empty pill bottles and the lingering sound of the garbage disposal. At 72 years old, I was completely alone and utterly defenseless, abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect me. But as I stood there, something unexpected began to grow alongside my fear and pain. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a spark of pure, crystalline anger. David had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had no idea what I was capable of when I had nothing left to lose. That first night without my medications was hell on earth. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as my heart hammered against my ribs in an irregular rhythm that terrified me. Was this what a heart attack felt like? Every few minutes, I'd press my fingers to my wrist, trying to count the erratic beats, wondering if I should call 911. But what would I tell them? That my son had destroyed my heart medication because he thought I was weak. The arthritis pain was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Without the anti-inflammatory pills, every joint in my body felt like it was on fire. My hands were so swollen I couldn't even grip the phone properly when I finally worked up the courage to call David at 3 in the morning. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again at 4. Voicemail. By 5 o'clock, desperation had me calling every 10 minutes, my voice getting more frantic with each message. David, please, I need my medications. My heart is racing and I can't. Voicemail. Honey, I'm scared. I think something's really wrong. Voicemail. Please, just call me back. Voicemail. When the sun finally rose, I realized with growing horror that all my calls were going directly to voicemail now. He'd blocked me. My own son had blocked his elderly mother's phone number after destroying her life-saving medications. Around noon, when I could barely walk from the pain, I decided to drive to the pharmacy myself. Maybe I could explain the situation, get emergency refills. Dr. Martinez had always been understanding about my conditions. The young pharmacist, Jessica, looked at me with sympathy when I explained what had happened, but her expression quickly shifted to confusion as she pulled up my file on her computer. Mrs. Chen, she said carefully, I see here that your son called yesterday afternoon. He's listed as your designated caregiver with power of attorney, and he informed us that you've been misusing your medications. My blood ran cold. Misusing them? Jessica, you've filled my prescriptions for 3 years. Have I ever? He said you were taking more than prescribed and exhibiting drug-seeking behavior, she continued, clearly uncomfortable. He requested that all future medication releases go through him for approval. I'm sorry, but without his authorization, I can't dispense anything. I felt the walls of the pharmacy closing in around me. Jessica, please. You know me. Have I ever acted like someone who was abusing drugs? I can barely open the pill bottles with my arthritis. She looked genuinely pained. Mrs. Chen, I believe you, but I have to follow protocol. If your son has power of attorney and has made these claims, I need his written approval to release any medications. Maybe you could have him call us. He's blocked my phone number, I whispered, the humiliation burning in my cheeks. The drive home was a nightmare. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, and twice I had to pull over when my heart started racing uncontrollably. I was experiencing withdrawal from medications my body had depended on for years, and there was nothing I could do about it. Back home, I tried calling Dr. Martinez's office, but the receptionist gave me the same story. David had called them too, expressing concerns about my medication use and requesting that all prescriptions go through him for review. Dr. Martinez was out of town at a conference, and the nurse practitioner wouldn't override the son's wishes without speaking to the doctor first. I was trapped. For the next 2 days, I existed in a haze of pain and fear. I couldn't eat much, My stomach was in knots from anxiety and medication withdrawal. Sleep was impossible with my heart pounding and every joint screaming. I tried to research my legal options online, but concentration was nearly impossible. Then David finally showed up. He walked into my house like nothing had happened, carrying a bag from my favorite deli. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, setting it on the counter. "Brought you some of that chicken salad you like." I stared at him from my chair, where I'd been sitting for hours because standing had become too painful. "David," I croaked, my voice hoarse from crying, "I need my medications." "My heart." "You look fine to me," he said, not even glancing in my direction as he unpacked the food. "See? You survived without your precious pills. Just like I said you would." "I'm not fine," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "I haven't slept in 3 days. My heart is racing constantly, and the pain." "The pain is in your head," he said flatly. "You're a hypochondriac, just like Grandma was. Always complaining about some ailment or another." His words hit like physical blows. My mother had suffered from chronic pain too, and I'd watched my father dismiss her symptoms until the day she died, from a heart attack that might have been prevented if anyone had taken her seriously. "Besides," David continued, sitting down and helping himself to the sandwich he'd brought, "I've been doing some research on your finances. Do you know how much money you're wasting on medications every month? Between the copays and the insurance, it's hundreds of dollars that could be put to better use." "Better use for what?" I asked weakly. He looked at me then, and something cold flickered in his eyes. "Well, I've been thinking you might be more comfortable in a managed care facility. Somewhere with staff who can keep an eye on you, make sure you're not making poor decisions about your health." The threat was clear. Fall in line, or he'd put me away somewhere I'd have even less control over my life. That night, alone again and in agony, I realized that David wasn't trying to help me overcome addiction, he was systematically isolating and controlling me. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt completely and utterly trapped. But trapped animals, I reminded myself, can be the most dangerous when they finally decide to fight back. By the 4th day without my medications, I couldn't even pretend to be okay anymore. My hands had swollen to the point where I couldn't hold a coffee cup without dropping it. The tremors had gotten so bad that brushing my teeth became an ordeal, and putting on clothes was nearly impossible. I'd given up on anything with buttons or zippers. I was living in Harold's old t-shirts and elastic waist pants, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. The heart palpitations were the worst part. They'd wake me up in the middle of the night, my chest hammering so violently I was certain I was dying. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, gasping for air, wondering if this would be how Harold found me when he came to get me, if there was an afterlife, and if he'd forgive me for not fighting harder to stay alive for him. David returned on Friday morning, and this time he wasn't carrying deli sandwiches. He was carrying a clipboard and had that businesslike expression I remembered from when he used to practice his sales presentations in front of the mirror. "We need to talk, Mom," he said, settling into Harold's old recliner without invitation. "I've been making some calls about your situation." I looked up from the couch where I'd been lying, trying to find a position that didn't make every joint scream. "What kind of calls?" "Well, first I spoke with Aunt Linda," he said, consulting his notes like this was a board meeting. "I explained how your pill dependency has gotten out of control, how you've been calling me at all hours crying and begging for drugs. She's very concerned." My heart sank. Linda was Harold's sister, the only family I had left besides David. We'd grown distant since Harold's death, but I'd always thought she cared about me. "What did you tell her exactly?" "The truth," David said smoothly. "That you've been exhibiting classic addiction behaviors. Hoarding medications, taking more than prescribed, having emotional breakdowns when you can't access them. She agrees that you need professional help." "I never took more than prescribed," I whispered, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded weak and unconvincing. I also called Cousin Mike, David continued, and your neighbor Mrs. Patterson. Everyone agrees that your behavior has been erratic since Dad died. The constant doctor visits, the obsession with pills, the way you've isolated yourself from family gatherings. Each word was a carefully placed knife. I had been to the doctor frequently, because I had multiple chronic conditions that required monitoring. I had avoided family gatherings, because being around people reminded me too painfully of Harold's absence. But through David's telling, my grief and medical needs became evidence of mental decline and drug addiction. They all think it might be time to consider assisted living, he said, and there was something almost gleeful in his voice. Somewhere with medical supervision, where trained professionals can manage your medications and make sure you're taking appropriate doses. I don't need assisted living, I said, trying to sit up straighter despite the shooting pain in my back. I need my medications and my family's support, not to be warehoused somewhere because you've convinced everyone I'm incompetent. David's expression hardened. See? This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves my point. You think everyone's against you. You think I'm trying to hurt you instead of help you. That's not rational, Mom. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted my own perceptions. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my pain and fear were making me irrational. Maybe David really was trying to help, and I was too drugged out to see it clearly. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my blood run cold. I've been documenting the state of your house, he said casually. Look at this kitchen, dishes in the sink, newspapers on the floor, pill bottles scattered everywhere from your little tantrum the other day. The photo showed my kitchen from the worst possible angle, making it look like a hoarder's den instead of the home of someone who'd been too sick and heartsick to keep up with housework. But what horrified me wasn't the mess, it was that he'd been taking pictures without my knowledge, building a case against me. David, I said slowly, how long have you been planning this? Planning what? He asked innocently. I'm documenting concerning behavior patterns. Any responsible caregiver would do the same. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. He was wearing Harold's watch, the vintage Omega that Harold had treasured, the one he'd planned to pass down to our grandchildren if we'd ever had any. Where did you get that watch? I asked. David glanced down at his wrist as if he'd forgotten he was wearing it. Oh, this? I found it in Dad's jewelry box upstairs. I figured he'd want me to have it, and you're not exactly in a position to keep track of valuables right now. You went through our bedroom. The violation felt as physical as a slap. You had no right. I have power of attorney, Mom. I have every right to secure valuable items and make sure they're properly maintained. Speaking of which, I noticed you're not keeping up with the house payments very well. The checkbook register is a mess. My mind raced. I'd been managing my finances just fine until this week, when pain and withdrawal had made it hard to concentrate on anything. But I realized with growing horror that David had been going through my personal papers, my financial records, my most private spaces. I've been thinking, he continued, it might be easier if I just took over the financial management entirely. You're obviously struggling, and with your condition. My condition is that I need my medications, I said, anger finally breaking through the fear. The medications you destroyed. The medications you were abusing, he corrected smoothly. And until you can prove you're capable of responsible self-care, maybe it's better if the adults make the decisions. He stood up then, Harold's watch catching the light, and I saw my future stretching out before me like a prison sentence. David wasn't planning to help me get better, he was systematically dismantling my independence, my relationships, and my resources. The pills had just been the beginning. I'll be back on Monday to discuss the assisted living options, he said, pocketing his phone with its damning photos. Try to clean yourself up a little before then. These facilities do consider personal hygiene when evaluating candidates. After he left, I sat alone in my house, Harold's house, our house, and realized that David had been playing a long game I hadn't even known we were playing. Every conversation, every helpful suggestion, every time I'd gratefully signed papers giving him more control over my life, had been moves in a chess match where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. But I was learning them now. I made it exactly 3 blocks before my body gave out. It was Tuesday morning, 6 days since David had destroyed my medications, and I'd finally gotten desperate enough to attempt walking to the corner store. We were out of milk, bread, everything basic, and I was tired of living on crackers and tap water. I thought if I could just make it to Murphy's Market, the little store I'd been shopping at for 15 years, maybe I could buy some food and prove to myself that I wasn't completely helpless. I should have known better. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand, and every step sent lightning bolts of arthritis pain from my feet up through my spine. By the time I reached the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, my vision was going gray around the edges and my heart was hammering so erratically I thought it might just stop altogether. I remember thinking, as I felt my knees buckle, that at least if I died on the sidewalk, David wouldn't get the satisfaction of putting me in some cut-rate nursing home. The pavement was cold against my cheek when consciousness started slipping away, but then I heard a voice, young, female, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes to see a young woman kneeling beside me, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing scrubs with little cartoon stethoscopes printed on them. She had kind eyes, the warmest brown I'd ever seen, and she was looking at me with genuine concern rather than the irritation I'd grown accustomed to. "I'm okay," I tried to say, but it came out as more of a whisper. "No, you're not," she said gently but firmly. "I'm Rosa, I'm a nursing student." "Can you tell me your name?" "Margaret," I managed. "Margaret Chen." "Okay, Margaret. I'm going to help you sit up slowly, and then we're going to figure out what's going on." Her hands were gentle but competent as she helped me into a sitting position against the brick wall of the corner pharmacy. "Are you having chest pain? Shortness of breath?" "My heart," I said, pressing a shaky hand to my chest. "It's been racing for days. I can't, my medications." Something shifted in Rosa's expression as she took my pulse, her fingers cool against my wrist. She was quiet for a long moment, counting, and I could see her processing information with the kind of clinical assessment I remembered from my own nursing days, decades ago. "Margaret," she said carefully, "what medications are you supposed to be taking?" The whole story came pouring out. I don't know why, maybe it was because she was a stranger, or maybe it was because she was the first person in a week to look at me like I was a human being instead of a problem to be solved. I told her about David, about the pills in the garbage disposal, about the pharmacy and the doctor's office and how everyone believed I was a drug addict. Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Margaret," she said finally, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. What your son did, throwing away your prescribed medications, lying to your healthcare providers, isolating you from support, that's elder abuse. That's not tough love or helping you overcome addiction. That's abuse." The word hung in the air between us. Abuse. I'd thought it, suspected it, but hearing it from someone with medical training made it real in a way that terrified and relieved me at the same time. "But he has power of attorney," I said weakly. "Everyone believes him." "Power of attorney doesn't give someone the right to harm you," Rosa said firmly. "And from what you're describing, the withdrawal symptoms, the heart palpitations, the joint pain, you're experiencing exactly what I'd expect from someone who's been suddenly taken off cardiac and anti-inflammatory medications." She helped me to my feet, steadying me when I swayed. "Listen, I'm going to help you get to the urgent care clinic just down the street. They need to see you immediately, and I'll explain to them what's happened." "They won't believe me," I said, thinking of the pharmacist, the doctor's receptionist, all the people David had already poisoned against me. "They'll believe me," Rosa said with quiet confidence. I'm doing my clinical rotations at the hospital, and I know the signs of medication withdrawal when I see them. You're not a drug addict, Margaret. You're a patient who's being denied proper medical care. As we walked slowly toward the clinic, Rosa supporting most of my weight, she kept talking in that same steady, reassuring voice. I'm going to give you my phone number, and I want you to call me if you need anything. No one should have to go through this alone. Why? I asked, genuinely bewildered. You don't even know me. Rosa was quiet for a moment. My mother has multiple sclerosis, she said finally. She's only 52, but some days she can barely get out of bed. I know what it's like to watch someone you love struggle with chronic conditions, and I know how vulnerable that makes people. The idea that someone would take advantage of that vulnerability, especially family. She shook her head. It makes me sick. Your mother is lucky to have you, I said. She is, Rosa agreed without false modesty. But not everyone is so lucky. Some people have children who see their parents as burdens or opportunities instead of human beings who deserve dignity and care. We'd reached the urgent care clinic, and Rosa helped me into a chair before approaching the reception desk. I watched her explain the situation to the nurse, saw the nurse's expression change from skeptical to concerned as Rosa detailed my symptoms and the circumstances that had caused them. For the first time in a week, I felt like someone was actually listening. 2 hours later, I walked out of that clinic with temporary prescriptions for my heart medication and pain relief, a social worker's card, and Rosa's phone number written in careful handwriting on a piece of paper I clutched like a lifeline. But more than that, I walked out with something I'd almost forgotten existed, proof that there were still good people in the world. People who helped strangers not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine doing anything else. As I watched Rosa drive away in her beat-up Honda, she'd insisted on taking me home and helping me inside. I realized that I'd just met the kind of person David should have been. The kind of person who deserved to be rewarded for their kindness. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I started to form a plan. Rosa called me the next morning, just like she'd promised. How are you feeling, Margaret? She asked, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice. It had been so long since someone had asked that question and actually wanted to hear the answer. Better, I said, and it was true. The temporary heart medication from the urgent care clinic had stabilized my pulse, and the anti-inflammatory they'd given me had taken the sharpest edge off my joint pain. I actually slept for 4 hours straight last night. That's wonderful. Listen, I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday. I called my supervisor at the hospital, she's also a social worker, and she wants to speak with you if you're willing. My chest tightened with familiar anxiety. Will she believe me? Or will she think I'm just a confused old woman making up stories about her son? Margaret, Rosa said firmly, stop calling yourself old and confused. You're dealing with a traumatic situation that would challenge anyone at any age. And yes, she'll believe you. Her name is Janet Morrison, and she specializes in elder abuse cases. She's seen this before. 2 hours later, Janet Morrison was sitting in my living room, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything. She had Rosa with her, which made me feel less alone as I told my story again, this time with someone taking notes. Mrs. Chen, Janet said when I finished, what your son has done constitutes multiple forms of elder abuse under state law. The destruction of your medications is considered endangerment. His lies to medical providers to prevent you from accessing care is medical neglect. The unauthorized taking of your belongings, like your late husband's watch, is financial exploitation. But he has power of attorney, I said, repeating what had become my constant refrain. Power of attorney doesn't grant unlimited control, Janet explained. It's supposed to be used in your best interests, not to harm or control you. We can help you revoke that power of attorney and establish safeguards to protect you. For the first time in over a week, I felt a flicker of hope. But Janet wasn't finished. However, I want to be honest with you about what we're up against. Your son has been very clever. He's created a paper trail that supports his narrative, the calls to your pharmacy, your doctor, your family members. Fighting this will require evidence and testimony, and it won't be easy. What kind of evidence? Rosa asked. Documentation of the abuse, witness statements, medical records showing the effects of medication withdrawal. We'll also need to demonstrate that Mrs. Chen has the mental capacity to make her own decisions, which means comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations. My heart sank. That could take months. And in the meantime, David is planning to put me in assisted living whether I want to go or not. We can file for emergency protective measures, Janet said. But I won't lie to you, family members often have an advantage in these cases, especially when they've been planning as carefully as your son appears to have been. After Janet left, Rosa stayed to help me organize my thoughts and documents. We sat at my kitchen table, going through papers that David had scattered during his evaluation of my financial state. Rosa, I said suddenly, tell me about your mother. She looked up from the stack of bank statements she'd been helping me sort. What do you want to know? How do you manage? Taking care of her, going to school, working, it must be exhausting. Rosa's expression softened. It is. But she's my mom, you know. She worked 3 jobs to put me through high school when her symptoms first started getting bad. She never once made me feel like a burden, even when I was a difficult teenager. Now it's my turn to take care of her. What does she need? Medically, I mean. Physical therapy, mostly. Her insurance covers some of it, but not enough. The good programs are expensive, and I'm already working 2 jobs just to pay for my final semester of nursing school. Rosa paused. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said, but my mind was racing. How much would it cost? The physical therapy, I mean. Rosa looked embarrassed. Margaret, if you're thinking of offering to help, that's incredibly sweet, but I couldn't accept. How much? I pressed. The program she really needs runs about $30,000 over 2 years, Rosa said reluctantly. But honestly, just having someone listen and care means more to me than you know. You don't have to. And nursing school. How much do you still owe? Now Rosa looked uncomfortable. Margaret, why are you asking all this? I set down the bank statement I'd been looking at, a statement that showed I had far more in various accounts than David realized. Because in the past week, you've shown me more kindness than my own son has in years. You helped a stranger on the street. You stayed with me at the clinic. You're here now, helping me organize my life when you could be studying or working or spending time with your mother. That's just basic human decency, Rosa protested. No, I said firmly. It's not. If it were basic, David would have shown it to me. Your professors would have shown it. The pharmacist I'd known for years would have shown it. But they didn't. You did. Rosa was quiet for a moment, studying my face. What are you thinking, Margaret? I looked around my kitchen, at the house Harold and I had built our life in, at the financial statements showing assets David thought he would eventually inherit. I thought about Janet's warnings about fighting the abuse case, about how family members often win simply because the system assumes they know best. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that maybe there's more than one way to get justice. And maybe the people who deserve to benefit from a lifetime of hard work aren't always the ones you gave birth to. Rosa's eyes widened as she began to understand what I was suggesting. Margaret, you can't. Can't what? Choose who gets my money when I'm gone. Can't decide that a stranger who showed me kindness deserves it more than a son who tried to destroy my life. But your family. What family? I asked. The son who's been stealing from me and lying about me to everyone I know. The relatives who believed his lies without even calling to check on me. You and your mother have shown me more family love in 3 days than David has in 3 years. Rosa stared at me, speechless. I could see her mind working, trying to process what I was suggesting. I'm not talking about charity, Rosa, I said gently. I'm talking about justice. About making sure my life's work goes to someone who understands what love and sacrifice actually mean. And as I said it, I realized that for the first time since Harold died, I had a purpose again. Not just surviving David's abuse, but making sure something good came out of this nightmare. Rosa reached across the table and took my swollen hand in hers. Are you sure about this? I looked at this young woman who had saved my life and was now trying to talk me out of changing hers, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. I've never been more sure of anything. The lawyer Rosa found for me looked like she could eat David for breakfast and ask for seconds. Patricia Hawkins specialized in elder abuse cases, and when she walked into my living room that Thursday morning, I could practically feel the temperature drop 5 degrees. She was probably in her 40s, with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and the kind of sharp suit that said she meant business. Mrs. Chen, she said, settling into Harold's old chair with a briefcase that looked like it could double as a weapon, Rosa has filled me in on your situation. I'm going to be very direct with you, what your son has done is criminal, and we're going to make him pay for it. I liked her immediately. But first, Patricia continued, pulling out a legal pad, I need to understand exactly what assets we're dealing with. Your son seems to think he knows your financial situation, but Rosa mentioned you might have resources he's unaware of. This was the part I'd been both dreading and anticipating. For the past 3 days, I'd been going through Harold's filing system, the one David had never bothered to investigate thoroughly because he'd been so focused on the obvious bank accounts and investment portfolios. Harold was a careful man, I began, spreading documents across the coffee table. He believed in diversification, not just of investments, but of knowledge about investments. Patricia's eyebrows rose as she examined the papers. These are bonds registered in your name only. Your son wouldn't have access to these through power of attorney unless you specifically granted it to him. I didn't, I said firmly. Harold set these up as my personal security fund, separate from our joint accounts. He said every woman should have money that was hers alone, just in case. Smart man. What else? I pulled out more documents, feeling like I was revealing buried treasure. There's a safety deposit box that only I have access to. Harold's grandmother's jewelry is in there, plus some gold coins his grandfather collected. I had them appraised about 5 years ago, they're worth significantly more now. And this? Patricia asked, examining another set of papers. A small investment account Harold opened for me when we first got married. He called it my Mad Money Fund. It's grown quite a bit over 43 years. Rosa, who had been quietly listening from her spot on the couch, suddenly spoke up. Margaret, how much are we talking about here? I looked at both women, took a deep breath, and said the number that had been burning in my mind for days. Altogether, about $180,000 that David has no knowledge of and no legal access to. The silence in the room was deafening. Jesus Christ, Patricia whispered, then immediately apologized. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. It's just, that's a substantial amount of money. It's my money, I said simply. Harold worked overtime for 30 years to build our security, and I worked part-time as a nurse until his health got bad. We lived modestly and saved carefully. This is the result of a lifetime of sacrifices. Patricia was already scribbling notes. Your son has no idea these assets exist. None. He's been focused on the joint checking account, the main investment portfolio, and the house. He thinks that's all there is. I paused. The question is, how quickly can I move this money to someone else before he figures out it exists? You want to give it all to Rosa, Patricia said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Every penny. Rosa immediately started shaking her head. Margaret, I can't accept that much money. It's not right. That's your life savings. Part of it, I corrected. David will still inherit the house and the accounts he knows about, which is more than he deserves. But this money, this represents the part of my life that he tried to destroy. I want it to go to someone who will use it to build something beautiful instead of tearing something down. Patricia leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, are you certain this is what you want? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. Your son will likely challenge this in court. Let him try, I said, feeling a steel resolve I hadn't experienced in years. He'll have to admit he was systematically abusing me to challenge a gift I made while demonstrably competent. That should make for interesting testimony. The timing is crucial, Patricia continued. We need to establish your mental competency beyond any doubt, execute the transfers legally, and create a paper trail that shows this decision was made freely and without coercion. How long will that take? If we move fast. A week. Maybe less. But Mrs. Chen, your son is planning to put you in assisted living soon, isn't he? Monday. He's coming Monday to discuss facilities. Patricia and Rosa exchanged a look. Then we work this weekend, Patricia said. I'll need you to undergo psychological evaluation to establish competency. We'll need witnesses to your state of mind. And we'll need to move the assets quickly and quietly. What about David? Rosa asked. Won't he notice when Margaret suddenly seems stronger? More confident? I thought about this for a moment. David had become so accustomed to my fear and helplessness that he probably wouldn't recognize strength if it walked up and slapped him. But Patricia was right to be cautious. I can play the part for a few more days, I said. Let him think he's won. Let him believe I'm resigned to whatever fate he has planned for me. Meanwhile, we'll be working behind the scenes. There's something else to consider, Patricia said carefully. Once you make this gift, Rosa becomes a target. Your son will likely try to claim she manipulated or coerced you. She needs to be prepared for legal challenges, possibly harassment. Rosa's jaw set with determination. Let him try. I've dealt with bullies before. This won't be some playground bully, Rosa, I warned. David is smart and ruthless. He'll try to destroy your reputation, your career prospects, anything he can reach. Then we'd better make sure we do this right, Rosa said firmly. If we're going to fight him, let's fight him with everything we've got. Patricia smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I like your style, both of you. All right, here's what we're going to do. As she laid out the plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold died. I felt like I was part of a team again. Not controlled or manipulated or managed, but genuinely supported by people who wanted to help me succeed. David thought he'd isolated me, made me helpless and dependent. He had no idea that his cruelty had introduced me to the two strongest women I'd ever met. And he definitely had no idea what we were about to do to him. David walked into my house on Monday morning expecting to find a broken woman ready to surrender her independence. Instead, he found me sitting at the kitchen table, fully dressed, medication bottles arranged neatly beside me, and legal documents spread across the surface like a battle plan. Mom, he said, his voice uncertain. This wasn't the defeated, trembling woman he'd left behind a week ago. What's all this? I looked up at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. I saw the expensive suit paid for with money he'd skimmed from my accounts. I saw Harold's watch gleaming on his wrist. I saw the barely concealed irritation in his eyes at finding me coherent and organized instead of desperate and compliant. Sit down, David, I said calmly. We need to talk. Actually, we need to get going, he said, checking Harold's watch with theatrical impatience. I have appointments at 3 different facilities this afternoon. I've narrowed it down to places that will take your insurance, Anne. I said sit down. Something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. For a moment, I saw confusion flicker across his face, as if he couldn't quite process this version of his mother. The woman who had been crying over pill bottles just a week ago was gone, replaced by someone who reminded him uncomfortably of his father when Harold meant business. David sat, but he perched on the edge of the chair like he was ready to bolt. "Mom, what's gotten into you? You look different." "I feel different," I said, sliding the first document across the table. "I've had my medications restored, thanks to the social worker who helped me understand what was happening to me." His face went pale as he read the letterhead. Margaret Chen vs. David Chen, petition for revocation of power of attorney. "You can't do this," he said immediately, his voice sharp with panic. "You're not competent to make these decisions. I have documentation." "You have lies," I interrupted, sliding another document across the table. "This is a psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez at Valley Medical Center. She found me to be completely mentally competent, with no signs of cognitive decline or decision-making impairment." David's hands were shaking as he read the evaluation. I could see him trying to process how his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. "This is impossible. You were incoherent last week. Crying, begging for drugs." "I was experiencing withdrawal from medications you illegally destroyed," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Medications prescribed by my doctor for legitimate medical conditions. The same medications I'm now taking again, which is why I'm sitting here clear-headed enough to see exactly what you've been doing to me." "What I've been doing?" David's voice cracked with false outrage. "I've been trying to help you. You were addicted." "I was never addicted," I said firmly. "And you know that. Just like you know that taking my husband's watch without permission is theft. Just like you know that lying to my pharmacy and doctor to prevent me from accessing medical care is abuse." I slid another document across the table. David's face went from pale to gray as he read the police report. "You called the cops on me," he whispered. "I reported the crimes you committed against me," I corrected. "Elder abuse. Medical neglect. Financial exploitation. Theft. The district attorney's office is very interested in your case, David. Apparently, you're not the first adult child they've seen who thought a power of attorney was a license to control and abuse an elderly parent." David stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This is insane. You're my mother. I was trying to protect you from yourself. By destroying my medications. By stealing my belongings. By lying to everyone about my mental state." I stood too, and for the first time in months, I felt taller than my son. "That's not protection, David. That's abuse. And it stops today. You can't revoke the power of attorney," he said desperately. "I've already made arrangements with the facilities. I've told them about your condition. My condition is that I'm a 72-year-old woman with arthritis and a heart condition, both of which are well managed with proper medication and medical care," I said. "What's your condition, David? What kind of man systematically destroys his own mother's health and independence for what? Control? Money?" His face twisted with something ugly. "You have no idea what it's been like, dealing with your constant neediness since Dad died. The phone calls, the doctor appointments, the endless complaining about aches and pains. Do you know what my friends say when I tell them I have to manage my hypochondriac mother's pill schedule? So you decided to make it easier on yourself by making me disappear into a nursing home," I said. "How convenient. And profitable, considering you've been helping yourself to my accounts. That money was for your care. Harold's watch was for my care. The bonds you've been researching how to access were for my care." I pulled out another document. "This is a forensic accounting of my finances, David. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every administrative fee you charged to my accounts, every piece of property you removed from this house. It's all documented." David stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. How did you? Who helped you with all this? People who understand what family actually means, I said. People who know that love means protecting someone, not controlling them. This is ridiculous, David said, but his voice had lost its authority. You're a sick old woman who's been manipulated by strangers. No court is going to. Actually, they already did. I slid the final document across the table. Emergency restraining order. You're no longer allowed to make medical or financial decisions on my behalf. You're not allowed to contact my healthcare providers. And you're not allowed to return to this house without my permission. David picked up the restraining order with hands that were now visibly trembling. As he read it, I watched 20 years of careful manipulation and control evaporate before his eyes. You can't do this to me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm your son. Yes, I said sadly. You are. And that's what makes this so heartbreaking. David looked around the kitchen, the scene of so many family dinners, birthday celebrations, quiet moments when he was still the little boy who ran to me when he scraped his knee. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of that child in his eyes, confused and frightened. Then his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. This isn't over, he said, grabbing his keys from the counter. You think some social worker and a cheap lawyer can protect you from me? You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I said, I think I'm just beginning to understand exactly what you're capable of. And that's why I've made sure you'll never have the chance to do it again. David stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out what other surprises I might have in store for him. Then he turned and walked out of my house, possibly for the last time. After the door slammed behind him, I sat back down at the kitchen table and looked at the legal documents spread before me. For the first time in 5 years, I was completely in control of my own life. But I knew David well enough to know that he wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. The real battle was just beginning. After David slammed the door, I didn't move for a long time. The house was silent again, but this time it didn't feel suffocating. It felt sacred, like the moment after a storm when the world holds its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers Patricia had helped me organize, the ink still fresh on the restraining order, the notarized revocation of power of attorney, and the document outlining the financial transfer that would change everything. I should have been exhausted, but instead, I felt more awake than I had in years. Not manic. Not disoriented. Just clear. My pain was still there, a dull throb in my joints and a tightness in my chest that reminded me of my limits. But beneath it, there was a steadiness, something closer to peace. Patricia arrived at 9 sharp the next morning. Rosa was with her, wearing a neat blue sweater and carrying a thermos of tea that smelled like chamomile and lemon. Her face lit up when she saw me standing at the door without assistance, and I noticed the way her eyes immediately scanned my posture, my breathing, the way a nurse, or a daughter, might do when she cares more than she wants to admit. "Morning, Margaret," Patricia said briskly, stepping inside and placing her briefcase on the table like a surgeon prepping for a high-stakes operation. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "Let's begin." What followed was less dramatic than I expected and more emotional than I was prepared for. Patricia walked us through every document, explaining each clause in patient, clear language. The legal language danced with finality: irrevocable trust, disbursement structure, witness attestation. Every page was a small rebellion, a promise that the life David tried to steal from me would be used for something good. Rosa sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She kept trying to protest, her voice trembling with the weight of disbelief. "I don't deserve this," she whispered at one point, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is your life savings, Margaret. You worked for this. You and Harold built this together. I just helped you across a sidewalk." "You did more than that," I said softly, placing my hand over hers. "You saw me. You believed me when no one else did. You treated me like a human being when my own son treated me like an inconvenience. That's not just kindness, Rosa. That's character. Patricia nodded, satisfied, and handed Rosa a pen. We can structure the transfer in 2 parts, she explained. One is an immediate gift, $150,000. It will go into your account by the end of the week, with tax protections in place. The second is a trust for your mother's medical care. That one is irrevocable, and it ensures the funds are used only for her treatment and support. Rosa hesitated, her hand hovering above the signature line. What if your son sues me? Patricia's expression didn't change. He might try. But we've documented everything. Video testimony, medical evaluations, written statements. If he claims coercion, he'll have to prove it in court. And frankly, the evidence of his abuse is far stronger than anything he could manufacture. You're protected. But the scrutiny, my school, my future employers. We'll be proactive, Patricia said. A public statement, if needed. I've worked with advocacy groups who will support us. You've done nothing wrong. Accepting a gift from someone of sound mind is not a crime. I looked at Rosa and could see the war inside her. She was torn between gratitude and guilt, between wanting to honor my choice and the fear that she was somehow stealing something not meant for her. So I leaned closer and said the thing I'd been holding in my heart since the moment I met her. Rosa, you are not stealing anything. David tried to steal my dignity, my agency, my life. You helped me reclaim it. This money, it's not just a gift. It's a statement. I'm choosing to build something with it. With you. Rosa's hand trembled as she finally signed her name. Her tears fell silently onto the paper, leaving 2 small, darkened spots that made it all the more human. After the last signature was done, Patricia stood and packed away the files. That's it, she said. It's done. And it's airtight. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photograph. This is my mother, she said, handing it to me. Her name is Lucia. She used to be a dancer. That's her at her recital in 1989. The woman in the photo was radiant, tall and graceful, with kind eyes that mirrored her daughter's. She wore a white leotard and held a bouquet of yellow daisies. The joy on her face was unmistakable. She deserves the world, Rosa said softly. I didn't know how I was going to give it to her. But now maybe I can. I held the photo gently in my lap and smiled. You already are. As Patricia left to file the documents with the court and notify the necessary agencies, Rosa stayed for tea. We sat in the living room, the late morning sun streaming through the curtains, warming the walls that had once felt like a prison. Now they felt like sanctuary. You know he'll retaliate, I said eventually. David won't go down quietly. Rosa nodded. Let him come. I'm not afraid of him. Neither am I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. She helped me clean up the table, pausing to gently massage my swollen knuckles as I winced reaching for a teacup. Her touch was light but firm, confident. Healing. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it all sink in. I had lost a son, but I had gained something else. Something far rarer and infinitely more precious, the quiet assurance that even after betrayal, even after years of silence and suffering, I could still choose where my love went. And this time, I had chosen right. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the legal transfer to Rosa was finalized, the silence shattered. It began with a letter. A thick, glossy envelope arrived with a return address I recognized immediately, Chen and Park LLP, the law firm where David had done his internship years ago. His name was no longer listed on the building signage, but that didn't stop him from using their stationery like it lent him credibility. Inside, the letter was filled with the kind of folk-concerned language that made my skin crawl, phrases like potential elder manipulation, questionable mental competency, and intent to reverse unlawful transfers. It was laughable, if it hadn't been so grotesque. I read the letter twice, then folded it calmly and set it on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply picked up the phone and called Patricia. "He's claiming that Rosa coerced you?" she asked, incredulous. "He's claiming everything," I said. "That I'm senile. That Rosa is some grifter who preyed on my loneliness. That I've fallen under the influence of a manipulative outsider." "He's going to file a motion," Patricia said with a sigh. "And he'll report Rosa to the state nursing board, hoping they'll suspend her credentials. Typical playbook: discredit the witness, isolate the victim." "But it won't work, right?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It won't work," she confirmed. "We've documented everything. But we need to be proactive now. I want you to prepare a sworn affidavit. I'll also schedule a second psychiatric evaluation for you, different doctor, different facility, just to reinforce the record." Rosa took the news better than I did. When I called to warn her that David had started making calls, including one to her university's dean of clinical programs, her response was calm, almost clinical. "He's coming after me because he's already lost control of you," she said. "I can handle it, Margaret. I've dealt with institutional pressure before. They'll investigate, but I've got nothing to hide." Still, I could see the toll it was taking. Her voice was tight when she talked about her mother's medical appointments, her hours at work getting cut because of the distraction. The dean had placed her on temporary review status, not disciplinary, but it meant she wouldn't be allowed near patients until the inquiry was resolved. "That man ruins everything he touches," I muttered when she told me. "No," Rosa corrected gently. "He tries. But we won't let him." By Friday, the local Adult Protective Services office had contacted me. A woman named Amanda Wells arrived at my door in a blazer and flats, holding a clipboard and trying not to look uncomfortable. "Mr. Chen has filed a concern for elder endangerment," she said as she stepped inside. "He alleges that you've been manipulated by a younger woman into giving away assets under duress." I raised an eyebrow. Did he mention that the woman in question saved my life after he tried to kill me by flushing my medication down a garbage disposal? Amanda blinked. "That's not how he framed it." "No," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "I don't imagine it is." I served tea while Patricia arrived via Zoom on my tablet, and Rosa showed up 15 minutes later, bringing photocopies of the clinic records and a signed character statement from her hospital supervisor. Amanda listened, took notes, and left with a stack of documentation thick enough to put David's claims to shame. "I'll be honest," she said on her way out. "We see this more and more, children trying to control aging parents under the guise of concern. Most of the time, the parents are too frightened to speak up." "You're braver than most." "I'm tired," I said. "Not brave. Just tired of being erased in my own story." That night, someone slashed Rosa's car tires. The Honda was parked in front of my house. She had stayed late to help me prep for the follow-up evaluations Patricia had scheduled. It was nearly midnight when she went to leave and came back inside 10 minutes later, pale and shaking. "They cut them," she said. "All 4. Clean lines, not an accident." I called the police while Rosa texted her hospital supervisor to document the incident. The officers were polite but distant, and though they took the report, I could see they weren't hopeful about catching anyone. I didn't need proof to know it was David, or someone he paid. The message was loud and clear. The next day, Rosa's phone started ringing non-stop. Anonymous numbers. Voicemails filled with slurs. Someone created a fake Facebook account using her photo, accusing her of elder fraud. A nursing student helping elderly patients just to steal their money. "I'm fine," she insisted when I asked if she needed to step back. "You're not fine," I said, gently touching her arm. And you don't have to pretend for me. But she smiled through her tears. I just want this to matter. I don't want him to win. He won't, I promised, though I wasn't sure what victory would look like anymore. We hunkered down, the two of us, like soldiers waiting out a siege. Patricia filed counterclaims. Rosa's university launched a formal inquiry but allowed her to continue coursework remotely during the review. I gave my second mental competency statement, stronger than the first, the psychologist noting my clarity and insight in the face of trauma. Then, the first real break came, not from a courtroom, but from a stranger. A young woman named Lily posted a video online. She was 23, a pharmacy tech, and she'd been on shift the day David called to flag me as a drug seeker. In her video, she described the unease she'd felt, the rehearsed tone of David's call, how controlling he sounded. It never sat right with me, she said. Now I know why. The video went viral. Within a day, #JusticeForMargaret began trending locally. Comments flooded in from people who had been manipulated by family members, people who had worked in clinics and seen abuse slip through the cracks. Margaret Chen's name became a quiet rallying cry. Rosa's school lifted her probation. The harassment slowed. And I began to feel, for the first time, that David's shadow was shrinking. But I also knew, deep down, that he wouldn't disappear without one final, desperate strike. And when it came, we had to be ready. When Rosa's phone buzzed at 7 in the morning, we both flinched. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a hot water bottle on my lap, the ache in my knees already building. She looked at the screen, then turned it toward me. Dean Hastings, voicemail. Play it, I said quietly. Rosa hesitated for a moment, then hit speaker. Rosa, this is Dean Hastings. I've just seen the viral video circulating about Mrs. Chen's situation. I want you to know the university is taking it seriously. I've called an emergency review of the inquiry into your conduct, and I've suspended all pending investigations. We owe you an apology, and our support. Please come see me today. Rosa's face crumpled, not with fear this time, but with sheer emotional exhaustion. I reached across the table and took her hand, letting the silence settle over us like a warm quilt. That's something, she said eventually. That's more than I expected. It's not more than you deserve. Later that day, we drove to campus together. I waited in the car while she walked into the dean's office building, standing straighter than I'd ever seen her. She came out 20 minutes later with a small stack of papers in her arms and a stunned look on her face. They're giving me back everything, she said, breathless. My clinical schedule. My rotation. Even the scholarship they froze. And they want me to speak next month at the Nursing Ethics Symposium about elder advocacy. My throat tightened. Good. That night, Rosa's video about what happened to me, her side of it, went online. It wasn't flashy. No music, no editing. Just her sitting in her mother's living room, speaking into her laptop camera, her voice steady and raw. My name is Rosa Hernandez, she began. I'm a nursing student. And 3 weeks ago, I found a woman collapsed on a sidewalk outside Murphy's Market. Her name is Margaret Chen, and she changed my life. She told them everything. The medications. The garbage disposal. The power of attorney abuse. The lies, the slashed tires, the fake social media accounts. She told them how I had saved her too, how our bond had restored something in both of us. Within hours, the video had hundreds of shares. By morning, it had thousands. And then the news vans showed up. It started with a polite email from Channel 8, then a knock at the door from a reporter named Ava Morales, who wore flat shoes and no makeup and introduced herself like she wasn't there to exploit anyone. I want to do this right, she said. If you're willing to talk. I looked at Rosa, then at the reporter. We'll talk. But only on our terms. Ava nodded. You set the boundaries. So we told the story again, this time for an audience we couldn't see. Rosa spoke first, measured and professional, explaining the medical implications of suddenly stopping medications. She quoted statistics about elder abuse and financial control. Then I spoke, not trembling, not crying, just telling the truth. I'm 72 years old, I said, looking straight into the lens. I've paid taxes my whole life. I raised a son. I worked as a nurse until my husband's illness made it impossible. And I was nearly killed, not by age or disease, but by someone who claimed to love me. The segment aired 3 days later under the headline, When Family Fails, a story of abuse, resistance, and the power of kindness. I watched it from my recliner, Harold's blanket over my legs, Rosa curled beside me on the couch. Her mother, Lucia, had come to visit, and she sat in the armchair across from us, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I had no idea, she said, her voice a rasp. What you two have been through. You've been going through your own war, I told her gently. We all carry our battles differently. After the news piece aired, the real flood began. The mailbox filled with letters, some typed, some handwritten. Messages from people in their 80s, 60s, even 30s, who had watched a parent or grandparent suffer in silence. Some had tried to intervene. Some hadn't known how. Some wrote just to say thank you. One woman named Eileen sent a donation check, not to me, but to Rosa, with a note, use this for your mother's physical therapy. I wish someone had helped mine. The letter that shook me most, though, came in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with slanted handwriting that read, I used to work in Dr. Martinez's office. I quit after your son tried to bribe me to delay your refill. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. I stared at that letter for a long time, holding it like something fragile. That means there's more, Rosa said quietly. More people who saw it and stayed silent. But now they're not. That week, the local senior center called. They wanted me to come speak, just 20 minutes, they said, on anything I wanted. Rosa insisted on coming with me. She adjusted the microphone, made sure I had a bottle of water, and stood at the back as I took the podium. I'd expected 20 or 30 people. There were nearly 100. They sat in folding chairs, faces weathered by decades of living, and when I started to speak, the silence in the room felt reverent. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me was aging, I began. Losing mobility. Losing memory. Becoming invisible. But I was wrong. The worst thing is being betrayed by someone who knows exactly where your wounds are and chooses to press harder. They nodded, some openly crying. I saw hands reach for tissues, arms wrap around shoulders. But I also saw something else, resolve. Recognition. But I also learned something else, I continued. That the people who hurt us don't get to write the ending. That there is kindness in this world. And sometimes, it shows up as a stranger in scrubs who refuses to look away. When I finished, they stood. Not clapping politely, but rising to their feet in a wave of solidarity. In the days that followed, I received invitations from advocacy groups, elder justice networks, even a law school ethics panel. But I declined most of them. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I knew the real fight wasn't in the spotlight. It was still coming. David hadn't shown his face in weeks. But I could feel the storm gathering. And when it hit, I would not be alone. The summons came on a Monday. It was delivered by a sheriff's deputy, crisp uniform, unreadable expression, the kind of man who'd probably seen everything and still didn't know where to place a story like mine. He handed me the envelope with a simple nod, no words. I closed the door quietly, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the weight of it. David had filed a formal motion to contest the financial transfer to Rosa, citing mental incompetence due to age-related decline, manipulation by a non-family party, and suspicious coercion under duress. I laughed. Not out of humor, but out of a weary kind of awe. The arrogance. The entitlement. He still believed this was his to win, that a courtroom could erase what he'd done, or that a judge would overlook the bruising truth if it was wrapped in legal jargon. I called Patricia immediately. "He's panicking," she said after reading the scanned copy I sent. "This is desperate, and it's full of holes. But it means we need to accelerate everything, witnesses, statements, affidavits. We go to war." And we did. The next 2 weeks blurred into a whirlwind of appointments and documentation. I gave depositions to the Elder Abuse Unit at the District Attorney's Office. I signed affidavits before a notary who brought tissues and said nothing when my hands trembled. Rosa's supervisor testified via video about her character and conduct. Dr. Martinez, just back from his conference, sat down with me in person. When I told him what David had done, about the lies, the medications, the blocked refills, he turned pale and said, quietly, "He told me you were confused. I trusted him because he was your son." "We all did," I murmured. "That's how he got away with it for so long." Patricia compiled everything into a file that she described as a brick of truth. And then came the hearing. It wasn't a full-blown trial, just an evidentiary hearing before a probate judge to determine whether David had grounds to contest the transfer. But to me, it felt like standing at the edge of a battlefield, my whole life under examination. The courtroom was small, impersonal, rows of pew-like benches, a judge in wire-rimmed glasses, and David, sitting across the aisle in a navy suit that didn't quite hide the sweat beading on his forehead. He looked thinner than I remembered, but no less dangerous. When our eyes met, he didn't blink. Patricia spoke first. Calm, precise, devastating. She laid out the timeline, the medical records, the evidence of financial exploitation. Then she played the audio clip Rosa had recorded with my consent, me describing the garbage disposal, my voice trembling, broken. I could see the judge's jaw tighten as he listened. David's attorney, a man who looked like he charged by the minute and felt nothing by the hour, tried to discredit me. He pointed to my age, to the stress of recent events. He insinuated that Rosa had influenced me during a vulnerable period. But when it came time for me to speak, I didn't waver. "I may be 72, I told the judge, but I'm not senile, and I'm not stupid. My son used my grief and my illness to control me. He isolated me, gaslit me, took things from my home, and told lies about my mental state. The only reason I'm alive and standing here today is because someone else, someone with no blood ties, no legal authority, showed me mercy when I couldn't get it from my own family." I paused. This isn't about a financial transfer. It's about choosing who I trust. Who I want to help shape the end of my story. And I choose Rosa. Rosa testified next, her voice calm, unwavering. She recounted our first meeting, the medical symptoms, the clinic visit, the calls, the threats. She ended with a statement that made the entire courtroom still. "I didn't save Margaret because I wanted anything from her. I saved her because someone had to. And I'd do it again, even if it meant walking away from every penny." When the judge ruled, he didn't even hesitate. "The court finds no evidence of coercion or diminished capacity. Mrs. Chen acted within her legal rights, and all transfers shall remain in effect. Furthermore, I am referring Mr. David Chen to the District Attorney's Office for further investigation under elder abuse statutes." David's face drained of color. As we exited the courtroom, reporters waited outside, but Patricia shielded us. "No statements," she said, one arm protectively around me. "Let justice do the talking." 2 weeks later, formal charges were filed against David: elder financial exploitation, medical neglect, obstruction of medical care, and unauthorized control of assets under false pretenses. The DA offered a plea deal: 3 years probation, community service, mandatory restitution payments, and a court-mandated public apology. David didn't contest it. I received the apology by mail. Typed. Cold. Probably written by his lawyer. But even if the words rang hollow, the fact that he was forced to sign them mattered more than the content. For once, someone else held him accountable. Meanwhile, Rosa thrived. With the financial transfer complete and the harassment behind her, she finished nursing school with top honors. Her mother, Lucia, began physical therapy at a private clinic I'd quietly arranged and paid for through the trust. And on the day Rosa walked across the graduation stage, she wore a lavender ribbon on her gown, a tribute, she said, to strength and survival. When she hugged me afterward, in front of her classmates and professors, she whispered, "You gave me my future." "No," I whispered back. "You gave me back mine." As the summer stretched on, I began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. I started attending therapy twice a month with a woman named Eileen, who specialized in elder trauma. We talked about guilt, grief, silence, and survival. I told her things I hadn't said aloud since Harold died, about the loneliness, the fear of aging, the shame of needing help. And slowly, I began to reclaim parts of myself that David had tried to erase. I cooked again, simple things at first. I joined a community book club. I walked, when my joints allowed it, through the small park where Harold used to sit and feed the birds. And once, when I saw a young woman helping an elderly man out of a taxi with tender patience, I felt something in my chest loosen, not pain this time, but hope. The truth is, I will never forget what David did. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive him either. But I've stopped waiting for him to apologize like he means it. That's not my burden anymore. My life, what's left of it, is my own. And for the first time in years, it feels like enough. 6 months passed. The leaves changed. The air cooled. My joints still ached on rainy mornings, and some nights I still woke up reaching for Harold's side of the bed. But the house no longer felt haunted. The heaviness that once filled every corner had begun to lift, little by little, like fog burning off under a steady sun. I didn't return to the person I was before David's betrayal. I don't think that version of me exists anymore. But what took shape in her place was something quieter, stronger, more self-assured. Not a reinvention, exactly. More like a reassembling. All the broken parts of me realigned into a woman I was beginning to recognize as whole. Patricia called one morning with news I hadn't expected. "The restitution payments are complete," she said. "Your son's finally made good on the court order." He had no choice, really. His professional license was suspended until full repayment. I didn't ask what he did for work now. I didn't want to know. The curiosity that once burned hot inside me had cooled into indifference. I had released David, not out of forgiveness, but out of self-preservation. He no longer occupied the center of my story. That space had been reclaimed by something worth nurturing. Rosa. She visited often, usually in the evenings after her shifts. Sometimes she brought takeout, other times flowers from the hospital garden or a loaf of crusty bread she insisted was a stress-baking experiment. We'd sit on the porch with tea, my knees wrapped in heat pads, her feet propped up on the railing. We talked about everything: patience, her mother's progress, my stubborn tomato plants that refused to grow. But mostly we just sat in the kind of easy silence that only exists between people who have already walked through fire together. Lucia had improved too. The physical therapy was working. She still needed assistance with stairs, but she was more mobile, more animated. Once, when she visited with Rosa, she took my hand and said in her soft, accented voice, "You gave me back years with my daughter." I didn't have the words to respond, so I just squeezed her hand in return. That moment said more than any speech could have. The local senior center invited me back to speak again, this time not just as a survivor, but as a community advocate. I was hesitant at first. The idea of standing in front of strangers and recounting something so intimate still made my palms sweat. But Rosa encouraged me. They don't need perfection, she told me gently. They need truth. And you have that. So I went. I wore a pale blue blouse and Harold's old locket. I read from the notes I'd scribbled on the back of an old grocery list, and somewhere in the middle of talking about fear and manipulation and the slow rebuilding of identity, I looked up and saw a woman in the second row wiping her eyes. Behind her, a man held his wife's hand a little tighter. I realized then that I wasn't speaking into a void. I was building a bridge. Afterward, a man in his 60s approached me with tears in his eyes. He said, "I haven't talked to my father in 15 years. He lives alone. I don't know if he's safe. But after hearing you today, I think it's time I find out." That one moment made all the fear and exhaustion worth it. I began volunteering at a small outreach program through Rosa's Hospital, a group that visited homebound elders once a week. I wasn't able to drive much anymore, but I made phone calls, wrote cards, checked in on birthdays. I listened to stories from women like me, some who'd escaped abuse, some still stuck inside it. Sometimes just hearing, "You're not crazy, you're not alone," was enough to crack open the shell they'd built around themselves. One day, Rosa came over carrying a manila folder and a nervous smile. "I need your opinion," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "And your blessing." Inside were neatly printed documents, a mission proposal, a financial forecast, early branding designs. "It's a nonprofit," she explained. "Something I've been dreaming about for months now. A program that pairs trained student volunteers with isolated elders. Sort of like mentorship, but with a medical component, check-ins, appointment coordination, even basic advocacy." I looked through the pages, each one filled with so much heart and strategy that I felt my throat tighten. "I want to name it after someone," she added quietly. "Someone who taught me that being forgotten doesn't mean being worthless. Someone who reminded me what it means to matter." My hands shook slightly as I turned to the last page, the Margaret Chen Foundation for Elder Connection and Advocacy. I looked up, but Rosa wouldn't meet my eyes at first. Her voice was small. "Is that okay? I should have asked sooner. It felt right." I reached across the table and took her hand, tears filling my eyes. "It's more than okay," I whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me." We filed the paperwork together the following week. And just like that, something that had started with a collapsed body on a sidewalk and a stranger's kindness had turned into something permanent. Something bigger than both of us. I didn't see David again. I heard from Patricia that he'd left the city, moved somewhere upstate, perhaps to start over. He never apologized in person. Never sent a letter. And honestly, I no longer needed one. Healing hadn't come all at once. It came in quiet moments. A handwritten thank you note from a woman I'd called on her birthday. A Sunday morning where I woke up and realized my first thought wasn't pain or fear, but what color tea cozy I'd use. A night when I listened to the wind in the trees and felt grateful just to be alive. One evening, Rosa and Lucia brought dinner, homemade empanadas and a peach pie Rosa had baked with a crust so perfect it made me laugh. We ate on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, the sun dipping below the horizon like a promise. As the stars began to peek out, Rosa leaned over and said, "There's something else." She hesitated, then smiled. "He proposed. His name's Eli. He's a pediatric nurse. Kindest man I've ever met." I blinked in surprise, then grinned. "Does he know what he's getting into?" "He will," she laughed. "But I want you there. Front row. Your family, Margaret. The family I got to choose." That night, after they left, I stood at the window with a cup of warm milk and looked out into the darkness that had once seemed so terrifying. Now, it felt full of possibility. Tomorrow would come. And I would meet it, not as someone broken, not as someone discarded, but as a woman who chose kindness, and in doing so, reclaimed everything. 1 year to the day after David destroyed my medications, I stood beneath a white awning draped in soft linens and watched Rosa walk down the aisle. It was a small ceremony, held in the garden of a community center that had once been a crumbling municipal building and was now lovingly restored by volunteers, many of whom were elders Rosa had worked with during her rotations. Lavender lined the path. Folding chairs were filled with people who had once known loneliness and now knew connection. There were nurses in pressed scrubs, seniors in Sunday best hats, children tossing flower petals with wide, toothless grins. In the middle of it all stood Rosa, graceful, radiant, every step forward a testament to the life she'd rebuilt not just for herself, but for others. She wore a simple, elegant dress. No veil, no drama. Just Rosa, sure-footed and strong, with her mother on one side and me on the other. We had walked her down the aisle together, one hand on each arm. It was Rosa's idea. "I want the 2 women who shaped me most to give me away," she'd said. And I had cried. Not from grief or regret, but from the profound joy of being seen not as someone to pity, but as someone to honor. After the ceremony, while guests clinked glasses and the band played soft folk music in the background, Rosa found me sitting under the old magnolia tree near the edge of the garden. She sat beside me in her wedding dress, kicked off her shoes, and leaned her head on my shoulder. "You tired yet?" she asked, her voice teasing but tender. I smiled. "More than I expected. Less than I feared." "You did good," she said quietly. "You made it to today." "No," I whispered, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "We made it." We stayed there for a while, watching the sky fade from gold to plum. The light strung across the trees flickered on, casting everything in a warm glow. Children danced barefoot on the grass. Lucia laughed at something the groom's mother had said. The air smelled like jasmine and citrus, and I felt, in every cell of my body, that I had arrived, not at an ending, but at a resting place I never thought I'd reach. In the months that followed, the Margaret Chan Foundation began its pilot program. 5 student volunteers. 10 elderly participants. Weekly phone calls. Bi-weekly home visits. Medication checklists. Emotional check-ins. Simple, essential acts of care. I attended the launch event in a dusty church basement with mismatched chairs and a table of donated pastries. There were no reporters, no cameras, just people, connecting. I gave a short speech. Nothing rehearsed. Just a memory. When I was at my lowest, I told them, I didn't need a miracle. I needed someone to notice. Someone to care. Someone to say, "You matter." Rosa did that for me. And now, thanks to her, we get to do that for others. That's how the world changes. Not with grand gestures, but with steady kindness. By spring, the foundation had secured a modest grant. By summer, a waiting list. By fall, a second cohort of volunteers began training. And I did what I could. My body still had limits. Some mornings were harder than others. The arthritis hadn't gone away. The heart medication was still a fixture in my pill organizer. But I was alive. I was useful. I was no longer a story told in past tense. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table sorting through mail when I found a letter written in blocky handwriting. No return address. I nearly tossed it, until I opened it and read the first line. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. But I'm writing anyway." It was from a woman named Cynthia. Her mother had died in a nursing home last year after being placed there by a family member under questionable circumstances. She had seen Rosa's video online. Then the news segment. Then the foundation launch. And something had clicked. I didn't realize until I watched your story that what happened to my mom wasn't just neglect. It was abuse. She deserved better. You helped me see that. And now I volunteer every Saturday at a memory care facility. I sit with people who don't remember their names but still remember how to smile. It's not much. But it's something. I folded the letter gently and placed it in a small wooden box I kept on the windowsill, the same box that once held Harold's watch and now held small notes like this. Quiet reminders that impact doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the living room, Rosa and Eli came by with a surprise. A framed photograph of the three of us, me, Rosa, and Lucia, taken at the wedding. In the photo, we're laughing. Real laughter. Mouths open, eyes crinkled, shoulders relaxed. I hadn't seen myself like that in years. On the bottom of the frame was an inscription: "Family is who shows up when the world walks away." I hung it above the mantel. Sometimes, I still think about David. Not often. Not with rage. More with resignation. I've heard he moved again, this time to another state. Patricia forwarded me the final restitution receipt. I looked at it, then filed it away. No satisfaction. Just closure. I've accepted that not all stories get reconciliation. Some only get distance. And that's enough. What matters is what came after. I found something better than revenge. I found purpose. I found chosen family. I found the power of a stranger's kindness and the courage to return it, multiplied. I used to believe that aging meant fading away. Now I know the truth. Aging just means there's more story to tell, if we're brave enough to write it ourselves. And I did. With trembling hands and a steady heart, I wrote every line.